In this lesson, we will explore the concept of pendulums and understand why they're considered destructive. We will learn what a pendulum is and how it influences us, how pendulums draw energy from us to fuel their growth and survival, and the role they play to ensure their existence. This lesson provides tools to help us recognize the consequences of allowing destructive pendulums in our reality. We will see how they divert us from our true purpose and goals. And finally, we'll learn how to free ourselves from pendulums. We are taught from childhood to obey the will of others, to perform our duties, to serve our country, our family, the company we work for, a political party, the state, or even an idea, to serve anyone except ourselves. To varying degrees, everyone has a sense of duty, responsibility, necessity, and guilt. Everyone is ready to serve a group or organization in one way or another. All these structures emerge and develop when a separate group of people begin to think and act in the same way. They are then joined by others, and the structure grows. They gain strength by forcing its members to follow the rules and eventually amassing the potential to gain control over large groups of society. On the material level, the structure consists of a group of people united by common goals and material objects, such as buildings, furniture, equipment, machinery, technology, and so on. On an energetic level, however, the structure appears when a group of people think in the same way, and as a result of which, the parameter of their thought energy are identical. Their thought energy finally unites into a single current. When this happens, as if in the middle of an entire ocean of energy, a separate independent energy information structure is created, which is referred to in transurfing as an energy pendulum. Eventually, this structure begins to live its own life and subjugate to its laws the very people who created it. Examples of pendulums in nature are bacteria colonies, populations of living creatures, schools of fish, herds of animals, forests, prairies, anthills, etc. Essentially, any organized, homogeneous structure made up of living organisms can be a pendulum. To give a quick example of the pendulum effect in nature, consider starlings. These birds move as a single synchronized unit influenced by an invisible collective force. This concept mirrors the same phenomena where people are suddenly drawn into the energy of a shared pendulum following the group dynamic. This is called a murmuration, which goes beyond simple mimicry. It's as if the birds function as one cohesive entity. The structure is referred to as a pendulum because the more people, i.e. adherents, that feed it with their energy, the more powerfully it sways, and with each group of pendulums swinging at its own unique resonant frequency. We're going to go into more detail with all of this, but here's a quick overview of some fast facts to get us started. Both haters and lovers of a pendulum are adherents to it. The more adherents a pendulum has, the more powerful it gets. A pendulum's only purpose is to consume energy from its adherents and grow. Examples of dying pendulums are yo-yos. An example of a rising or powerful pendulum is artificial intelligence. Now, when a pendulum grows powerful enough, such as a bureaucratic system, it creates its own laws which all its adherents subconsciously follow. Every pendulum is unique and so has its own characteristic beat frequency. For example, if you want to get a swing moving, you have to push it at a certain rhythm or frequency. This is called the resonant frequency. If the number of adherents decreases, the force of its swing is weakened. If it loses all its adherents, the pendulum will stop moving completely and thereby cease to exist as a separate identity. Examples of defunct pendulums are ancient pagan religions, stone tools, ancient weapons, outdated trends of fashion, and vinyl records, although that's making a bit of a comeback. In other words, all that once existed but no longer functions. Resonant frequency is the natural frequency at which an object or system vibrates most strongly. When an external force is applied at this frequency, the object or system absorbs the energy more efficiently, causing it to vibrate with greater amplitude. For example, if another tuning fork with the same frequency is nearby, it will begin to vibrate sympathetically due to the resonance. If it's not the same frequency tuning fork, you wouldn't see that ping pong ball over there move at all. Another example is when a singer hits the resonant frequency of a glass with their voice. The glass vibrates intensely and shatters due to the amplified energy. Every living organism represents a single unit of energy and so can also be considered an elementary pendulum. When a group of individual pendulums begin to sway in unison, a group pendulum is created which looms over its followers like a superstructure. The group pendulum exists as an independent entity and sets rules for its adherents to follow, partly to keep them together, but also to attract new ones. This type of entity is independent in the sense that it develops according to its own laws. Its adherents are unaware of the fact they're acting in accordance with the laws of the pendulum and not their own will. Napoleon Hill was aware of this idea when he said, "No two minds ever come together without thereby creating a third, invisible, intangible force which can be likened to a third mind." For example, a bureaucratic system grows and operates independently of individuals within it. While officials may have some freedom in decision-making, they can only act within the boundaries set by the system's rules. If they attempt to defy those rules, they risk being removed by the system. Any pendulum is by its very nature inherently destructive because it consumes the energy of its adherents and establishes power over them. The pendulum attributes no meaning to the well-being of each individual adherent. The purpose of the pendulum is only to get energy from its adherents, whether it is to their personal benefit or not. When a person comes under the influence of a system, they're forced to build their lives in accordance with its laws, otherwise the system will chew them up and spit them out. Once under the influence of a destructive pendulum, you can easily end up ruining your entire life, and as a rule, it is very difficult to break free without suffering losses. If someone finds a job in a company that aligns with their skills, goals, and values, they feel comfortable and motivated to contribute their energy to that system. In return, the corporate environment provides them with stability, benefits, and a clear career path. This person becomes part of the pendulum, giving their energy to it and receiving support in the form of structured work life, financial security, and social recognition. If a member rebels against the laws of the structure, the frequency of their thought energy ceases to be in harmony with the resonant frequency of the pendulum. Being deprived of essential energy, the pendulum either drives the maverick adherent out of the system or destroys them. However, if a person has ended up a long way away from a lifeline favorable to their growth, life inside the structure of an alien pendulum can be as soulless as hard labor or just turn into a very sad existence. In this case, the pendulum is purely destructive to the adherent. Whether they like it or not, a person who falls under a pendulum's influence loses their freedom, being forced to live by imposed laws and becoming a small cog in a big machine. That said, an individual can find themselves under the protectorship of a pendulum and achieve outstanding results. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, and other similar figures were all favorites of destructive pendulums. This does not mean that the pendulum was actually concerned for their personal well-being, for it exploited them to its own end. When Napoleon was asked whether he had ever been truly happy, he could count just a few days over his entire life. Of course, these are more extreme cases, but nonetheless relevant, and it assists in expressing the idea. The pendulum uses sophisticated methods to lure new adherents who fly to it like moths to a flame. How often are people deceived by the pendulum's advertising tricks and move far away from a potential happiness that was just so close? Young men leave for the army to lose their lives. Students go to university learning in vain to master a profession that is not really for them. They find work that feels alien but is supposedly prestigious and end up drowning in a swamp of problems, or they join their lives with a stranger only to regret it later. The following are qualities and characteristics of a pendulum. A pendulum is an autonomous information-based energy structure that acts more like an algorithm than an entity with conscious intention. A pendulum feeds on the energy of its adherents, which increases the power of its sway. A pendulum strives to attract as many followers as possible to source as much energy as possible. A pendulum makes a contradistinction between its group of adherents and all other groups. We are good, they're bad, we are better than they are, etc. A pendulum acts aggressively towards anyone who refuses to follow it, attempting to win them over, neutralize their position, or get rid of them. A pendulum hides behind masks and lofty ideas as it plays on people's feelings to justify its actions and attract as many followers as possible. Essentially, the pendulum is an egregore, and yet the concept of egregore does not fully reflect the entire range of possible interactions between an individual and an energy-based information structure. Pendulums play a much greater role in people's lives than one might like to think. The following example illustrates how a pendulum consumes the energy of its adherents. Imagine a packed stadium at an intense football match. Passions are running high, and the fans are raging with excitement. One player makes an unforgivable mistake, which results in his team losing the game. The fans in the crowd focus a storm of anger at the culprit player, ready to tear him into pieces. Imagine what a huge mass of negative energy does when focused on an unfortunate player. You would think that from such an attack of negative emotion, the player would die on the spot, but he remains alive and well, if not a little crushed by feelings of guilt. This is because the negative energy directed towards the player is absorbed by the pendulum. If this were not the case, then any individual becoming the object of a crowd's hate would lose their life, and any idol would simply float above the ground. We will not be the judge of whether a pendulum is an animate entity or simply an energy form. Either way, the distinction does not affect the transurfing method. The most important thing is to be able to recognize a pendulum and avoid being drawn into its game unless you stand to benefit from the interaction. There is one identifying factor by which a destructive pendulum can always be recognized. It always competes with others similar to it in the battle for adherence. The pendulum has one goal, which is to attract as many supporters as possible to source as much energy as possible. The more aggressive a pendulum behaves in the battle for devotees, the more destructive it is, i.e., the more dangerous it is to the life of the individual. Remember, a pendulum can be powered by both its supporters and its opponents. Its main task is to engage people in any way possible in order to occupy their thoughts. Some might argue that charitable organizations which protect the environment or animals shouldn't be seen as destructive. However, these groups still feed on a person's energy without prioritizing their happiness or well-being. While they promote compassion for others, they often remain indifferent to their own supporters. If someone feels genuinely happy and fulfilled working for such an organization, it might align with their true purpose. But it's important to ask yourself honestly, are you truly acting out of sincere care for others, or is it more about looking good or feeling better about yourself? Destructive pendulums have trained people out of choosing their own destiny because if people retain enough independence to have the freedom to choose, it would be much harder for the pendulum to attract so many followers. Our mind is so used to the idea that our fate is our lot in life that we find it really difficult to believe that we can simply choose a destiny which is more to our liking. It is advantageous for pendulums to keep their adherents under control, so they invent all sorts of ways of manipulating them. Let's be honest, transurfing is a pendulum. Different pendulums are of course destructive to varying degrees. At worst, transurfing would be minimally destructive because it focuses exclusively on the well-being of the individual rather than a shared goal. Transurfing would be a very unusual pendulum with a community of individuals concerned solely with their own destiny. If you were to do some homework, what pendulums do you see in your personal life that have their hook in you? We are telling you this in order to describe what it really means to choose your fate, so have patience, dear maker. Not all these ideas are easy to grasp, but as we go on, a clearer picture will emerge.